Welcome to the final PR in Lockdown podcast. Hold back the tears, I know. Your guide to PR and communications in a post-lockdown world. Produced by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA. I'm Rob Double, and in this episode, I'm talking to Kirsty Leighton, founder and managing partner of Milk and Honey PR. Now, this might be the last episode, but it's a jam-packed interview. From employees moving out of London completely, preparing the company for more uncertainties ahead, and moving back to office working, Kirsty provides us with a candid bird's eye view of life inside the Milk and Honey family. Hi Kirsty, thanks so much for being on the podcast. How are you doing?
I am very well, Rob. Very well indeed. I feel slightly naughty that I'm actually not in lockdown at the moment. I'm in the office for the first time for a very, very long time.
You'll be one of the few episodes that we're recording with someone who's actually in an office and not at home. So this is a rare thing to see on this podcast. So let's just chat first, though. Let's take it back, just so people, if they haven't heard of Milk and Honey PR, just give us an overview of what you guys are about.
Thank you very much. I started Milk and Honey in a little over 3.5 years ago, in January 17. It was just me on my own at first. I'm delighted to say that we've managed to grow that now to 27 people worldwide. I say worldwide because obviously UK is where we started up. It's where our biggest office is. We have a little over 20 people here. And then some by accident, some by design, we've now got people all over the place. So we opened an office in Australia, in Sydney, as one of our board directors moved to go back there in January of this year, of 2020. And then with a mix of lockdown and Brexit, we've got people in Toronto, in Paris, in Devon, in Macclesfield.
Truly international.
Exactly. New York, Toronto, Paris, Macclesfield, of course.
And you mentioned it there, and this is something that I really just wanted to chat through right at the beginning, is you actually set up a branch in Australia, and then lockdown happened. So just give us an overview of that challenge of building up that kind of infrastructure in a completely different end of the world, whilst not being able to leave your home.
Exactly. So Milk and Honey is set up really as a kind of a people first agency. Having spent most of my professional life in the last 25 years working with some phenomenal international brands and international agencies, I wanted to create an agency that where we weren't selling time, we would agree up front what good looked like and then power on to deliver it. I didn't want any of the team to work on more than 5 clients so they could really get their head into it and do well. So we put together a really fantastic team, and one of our board directors, Caroline Addy, who is a Brit but actually had lived and worked in Australia for a number of years, decided that she wanted to move back to Australia. So rather than lose her, she went out to set up in Australia. Timing, however, was tricky. She kind of faced a almost apocalyptic situation when she got out there. Not only when she got out there in January was the entire country on fire. There was then a swarm of locusts that they had to deal with, and then obviously this pandemic. So it's been an incredibly trying time, but I'm delighted to say that she's powered through, and now there's a team of 4 out there.
My goodness, yeah, that does sounds like a proper challenge. And in terms of back in the UK, back in the wet, cold UK, actually it was quite a sunny summer, wasn't it? Even though everyone was indoors, but I found that anyway. How did you find the initial period of lockdown? You know, that immediate shock, I suppose. Was that a period which did come with a degree of challenge?
I think anybody would realise that yes, it's been a very challenging time. I mean, we've been incredibly fortunate that as a business we've been enjoying some really great growth over the last 3 years, and we had planned to continue on that trajectory this year, and it just obviously wasn't going to happen. So we found ourselves experiencing quite an immediate economic impact as soon as lockdown happened. So some of the clients that we'd recently brought on, we're very fortunate that we've been winning on average a new client a month, which means that there's that constant growth, which is great, but also that kind of constant change that needs managing. So we found that a number of clients that had come in as projects that we were hoping to convert to retainers didn't materialize. There were a number of clients who understandably were under pressure economically themselves, and so put programs on pause, and others that cut budgets until they realized the impact change in the economy was going to have on their business. We don't specialize by any particular sector, so that actually helped us enormously because
diversified a little bit.
Exactly. So that diversification really did help us. We were impacted a little bit more on the consumer side, on the leisure, and on the travel front, as indeed the entire industry has been. But we kind of rallied together. We put a little project in place that we called Project Prosper internally, which just gave us a rallying cry, gave us some focus. We put some very short-term goals in place for the whole agency, and then made sure that everybody's contribution to that was very clear. We did put a couple of people on furlough whilst we just kind of worked out what we needed to do. We were able to bring them back within the immediately after the 3 weeks, thank goodness. And then we very much focused on protecting them. So we doubled our training budget and we doubled our marketing to make sure that we were as visible in market as possible. But then we did take a bit of a scalpel to some costs. So rather than kind of cut out whole line items, what we did is we kind of played with it. So for example, on team costs, we took a pension holiday for a number of months, and that, those kind of costs saves us kind of 8, 9, 10,000 a month. We were able, because we work in a working space, to manage our rents almost down to zero over that period as well. So we tried to be quite canny about it.
And in that time, how did you, as the founder and managing partner, what was that like for you, having to do that? As you said, you've been experiencing fantastic growth, winning a client a month on average, having to then, look at and as you said, take a scalpel to the business. How was that personally, and how did you reconcile and get into a place in your head where you're implementing it and doing what needed to be done?
Luckily, being a little bit older, I've been through a couple of different economic trying times previously, so I had a little bit of a playbook in my head. That said, when it's your own business, and indeed nobody's got the playbook for the pandemic situation that we found ourselves in. So it's very difficult, and emotionally you feel very responsible for the people that you've brought into the organization, both client side and indeed within the team. And so you feel personally deeply responsible for people's ability to pay their rent and pay their mortgage. And so I was just doing everything in my power. And selfishly, or not necessarily selfishly, but there were very long days that I was working. All of a sudden, I've got Australia, then we've got the UK, and then we've got people out in North America as well. So there was lots of plates spinning. And whilst there was the focus of actions that needed to be delivered, you can stay very focused as soon as you're not necessarily seeing the fruits of those labor converting. Then as an extrovert myself, I found myself occasionally going into quite dark places, as I don't mind admitting.
Yeah. And in terms of the training funding and the budget and stuff like that, you made a point of focusing and investing a lot in training programs and development programs for your team. Was that a conscious decision to help your team and give your team focus and making sure that the team still has that virtual feel, of being a single unit? Was that the aim behind that?
Well, the aim was kind of, it was multi-threaded in lots of ways. Actually, I wanted to make sure that the team, well, from a client and a market offer perspective, I wanted to make sure that we were upskilling ourselves as much as possible, so that we were able to deliver all of the materials and all of the work and all of the campaigns that we had in place as successfully as possible. And with a distributed workforce where you haven't got that that expert to the side of you or in front of you, being able to feel more and more confident as an individual on the areas that you're delivering was really important to me. I also wanted the team to be very focused. I didn't want anyone having gaps in their day where they could worry about what was potentially happening, and I wanted them to feel as in control as possible. And so I think being able to both to upskill the team and to also keep them focused, so that when new opportunities came through, their work rate was such that they could fit it back in again comfortably, was important.
So was that so you saw that as a risk in terms of people being at home, perhaps clients going on pause or anything like that? You saw that there was risk people's work rate, quite naturally would drop a little bit, and you wanted to keep people busy and keep people motoring along and at a sort of consistent level.
Very much so. Very much so. I think, so for some of the team, they were well practiced at working remotely. We've got our head of content, for example, Adam Toms, lives and works down in Devon and has done since the beginning.
That's a good life.
Exactly. So for him, he was very, very used to it. But then for other members of the team, finding themselves at home, having never worked flexibly, it was very difficult. So I needed to make sure that they felt connected, that they felt supported, and indeed that they were focused on their work, so that they didn't have time to worry about the security of their jobs.
And the team morale, keeping a team unit together when everyone's in different places, when everyone's working virtually in different continents, as you laid out earlier on. How did you try and keep the kind of team unit together? How did you try and keep people not just working as single entities on their own separate things, but actually reminding them that they're part of Milk and Honey, the family? So
there's been multiple check-ins, making sure that we're kind of doing that. We were doing twice weekly check-ins with the whole team. Individual line management check-ins were happening daily. We were then having all hands meetings more regularly, taking everybody through where we were against Project Prosper, what we said we were going to deliver. We made sure as well that outside of that to ensure that client teams weren't working as little islands together, but we were bringing everybody together. We created some agency-wide initiatives. So, for example, during lockdown, we went after the Investors in People accreditation. And so, again, we worked collectively and cohesively as a team to deliver on that. And I'm delighted to say that we got that accreditation. And we've just heard this morning, in fact, that we've been shortlisted for Newcomer of the Year, Best Leader, etc., etc. So that's
congratulations.
Thank you. But there was a number of initiatives such as that. So, for example, we got our BeCorp accreditation a little over a year ago now. But again, during lockdown, Jess Ballinger, one of our board directors who heads up that initiative, she worked very, very hard to put together our People, Purpose, Planet report, which was really assessing what we've been able to do since accreditation in the last year and what impact that has had, and then looking to continue to evolve that journey. So we've managed to add 20 points to our accredited score in the last year, and so again, working with all members of the team to deliver on different elements of that was very important.
I think you talked very candidly earlier on about the impact the lockdown period and the strain of having to go through the pandemic has had on you. You said that you did go to some dark places at points. What was the challenges for other people in the company? What were the things that you noticed as the real challenges that you had to deal with and help people with in the team, in terms of just being at home, working virtually, having to change their environment? What was there any surprises in there, and what were the real things you noticed, as the challenges?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think because we had a number of team members that were either working wholly remotely or indeed were working flexibly for some time, then we actually thought we were quite good at this whole flexible working malarkey. But when the entire team goes, then you realize that there's some elements that you really haven't fully thought through at all. So whilst we've got the technology in place, we also found ourselves in positions where for some of our team members, especially more junior team members that were in shared accommodation, we were kind of then going, okay, we need to send chairs home. We need to send desks home. Actually, for one of the team members, like, we need to buy them a freezer because there's 5 people in that house and they've got one fridge with a tiny little freezer. They can't get out enough. So, it's also just thinking about their working environment, how that's changing for them, and then what they need around them to make them feel comfortable. So that element was a bit of a challenge. But it's also really interesting to see that different members of the team have responded completely differently. So we use Discovery Insights a lot internally to help understand how best to communicate with one another and how to avoid clashes. And we found that those of the team that are more introverted have been much happier being at home and really kind of settled into it and quite enjoyed it. Whereas the extroverts that need to speak to think, that need to bounce ideas off one another more frequently, have been struggling all the more. In fact, we've actually found that since lockdown, there's been a further 3 members of the team that have bought houses outside of London and have decided to work permanently from remote locations. So I'm delighted to say that we figured that out.
I mean, talk about a change in circumstances, going, at lockdown spurring completely changing circumstances, deciding to leave where you are and move completely somewhere else and just work virtually, I think is a significant change in people's working lives, and such a good demonstration of how much the pandemic has changed so much in terms of that work-life balance. We're going to go on a quick break now, but as Kirsty's just been talking about, we're going to be discussing the now period and onwards, what's going on in the next few months as we transition into the new normal post-pandemic or post-initial lockdown stage. And we're going to be discussing as well what's going on in the industry in a long-term impact. So don't go anywhere. You have been going back to the office, as you said in the first half. You, in fact, broadcasting from the office, which I think is a rare thing on this series. And you've actually been there for a while. You've been there for a couple of weeks, and your team have gradually, or at least some of them, have been coming back to the office. Just talk us through that process, actually, of getting people back in. Did you notice a lot of people were keen to get back to the office, or you've noticed that some people are still quite, happy being at home?
It's really interesting. We find ourselves in mid-September now. I think some of us have been aching to get back in to an environment with some colleagues for some time. We actually found ourselves dribbling back in kind of mid-August. I say that because here in the UK, ordinarily there's 20 of us here in the office, and actually in the back end of August, I think there was 3 or 4 of us that were coming in regularly, and we were able to walk in. So we were able to come in without public transport, and so not really having to kind of deal with too many touch points. We're in a shared office environment, and there's very few other organisations that are back here at the moment. So we're in our own kind of little bubble with no other companies kind of within the immediate vicinity. So we're able to kind of create a little bubble. So from that perspective, it's worked quite nicely. I did actually move to a situation at the beginning of September where I was encouraging more and more people to come in, just because I felt that some of the cultural material of the organisation was slightly becoming undone. I think 6 months being apart is too long. Also, during that period, we've been fortunate enough to grow a little bit. So we've actually made 3 new hires during that time, and quite frankly, trying to onboard new individuals into an organisation where they've met everybody virtually, yes, they've got all the handbooks, yes, they know how our working processes work, but to just be able to just understand how we communicate with one another, what our interactions look like. We're pretty non-hierarchical, but it's difficult to experience that on one-on-one conversations that you're having through Teams or through Zoom. It's much easier to experience the reality of that in an office environment. So we're now up to about 12, but those 12 aren't in every day. And within that community, there's only 1 or 2 of them that get public transport.
Have you noticed a reconnect or of some sort, or a kind of re-establishing? Now that people have started to come back together, you're a couple of weeks in, or 2 or 3 weeks in, have you noticed there's been a really positive consequence to that? And I suppose personally as well, have you felt a lot happier, or do you feel a lot better now that you're managing back in an office environment?
I personally feel a lot more connected to people when I'm within their kind of, when I'm amongst them physically. It doesn't need to be every day. It doesn't need to be every week, but just having those touch points where we can come together and work closer together is really helpful. What I have found is our ability to problem solve and to kind of jump into one another's conversations and really help out or offer guidance or come come with new ideas or contacts is so much easier and so much more natural within an office environment. But that said, we've now got a number of the team, kind of about a third of the team, that are going to be permanently working remotely. So we need to now work that balance, that it can't be a situation where those within the office have a different or obviously they're going to have a different, but an extremely different experience from those that are here. So
I was just gonna say, how are you looking at that? How do you see, the prospect of managing people permanently virtually? Does it give you a bit of concern? Are there things that is it consuming a bit of your mind as to how you're gonna change the way you manage to deal with that?
I think we've got quite a parental kind of management style right across the organisation. We tend to try and want to cheerlead for everybody for what's special about all of them, and to celebrate them and their achievements in a way that's meaningful to them. So for us, the key word is being equitable rather than treating everybody equally. It's making sure that those that need a bit more support are getting the support. Those that need to be in the office because they need the camaraderie in a more physical manner are able to do that. Those that are more comfortable working remotely and creating that thinking time for themselves, that they've got that opportunity as well. So I think we're having to be a lot more thoughtful about how we deliver that. Line management and training is a particular area that is a bit more of a kind of a head scratch. Very, very sadly, we would ordinarily have taken in a number of interns over the summer and kind of given them their first snapshot into the PR universe. And unfortunately, all of that, both from economic but also for practical reasons, has sadly been put on ice at the moment. So I'm hoping that we can reinstigate that at year end. But at the moment, we just can't. We're just not in a position to be able to give anyone the material and the training and the support and the insight that they need. So that's a big loss for us, because again, as an organisation, and especially as a BeCorp organisation, it's really important that we are kind of looking to create new opportunities to get people into the industry and give them a leg up, and that's sadly missing.
You mentioned there BeCorp, that to get that accreditation, that goes into things like ethics, company governance, the workers, the customers. It's a very, very complete kind of scheme and needing to meet certain markers. Do you think that the mindset that gave you when you got the accreditation last August and your development since then, do you think that prepared you better or put you in a better place as a company and also as a manager to deal with the kind of challenges you've had to deal with over the last 6 months?
No, I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. But BeCorp is not for the faint-hearted. It really is quite an undertaking. I set Milk and Honey up as a limited liability partnership in the first instance. So it was set up from the get-go to be a shared ownership organisation. I wanted everybody that was part of the business to feel that it was their business by giving them some ownership. And I think that was really important. So within that, I think we've always thought about that, how to really kind of construct the business to work around our people. Both the great thing about BeCorp, however, is it takes that kind of people centricity out from the workers into our customers and our clients, further then into the community. And I think from that perspective, it's been enormously valuable.
Let's look at the coming few months. We are in a period still of change, still of transition. For you, you mentioned you had that significant shock at the beginning, and then you've actually seen some uptick over the last few months. You've taken on some new staff virtually. When you look at the next 3, 4, 5 months, how are you viewing it, and what are you prioritizing and planning for that period?
So I think at the moment I'm in a stage where there's a little bit more pressure, because for us our financial year is year end. So there's always more pressure as you get closer to the financial year end, when there's numbers that you've committed to and that you need to deliver. And obviously our commitment is to one another, so we can move them around as we need to. But yeah, there is a little bit more pressure at the moment. I think right now, whilst it's great to have 12 of the members of the team that are coming in at least a couple of days a week into the office, so we've got that point of reconnection, whilst that's been fantastic, I think with the ongoing kind of community lockdowns that are happening, the reduction in social gatherings that is happening, then we're preparing ourselves to kind of go back into lockdown. And so to that end, we're trying to make sure that not only are we functioning very effectively as client teams, but also broader as a total unit. Ordinarily, we would have all gone to Marrakesh for 3 days planning in May. Obviously, that's not happened. We've pushed it back to November. But I think, to be honest with you, that's not going to happen either. So we're now trying to find ways and means around that, because I really do, even for just a couple of days, want to try and bring the whole team together to be able to agree what the plans look like for next year, so we can all just get on the same page, reconnect, and then I think we can go away and work comfortably independently for a couple of months should we need to. But we do need to keep, to my mind, creating those in-person moments where we can semi-regularly come together as an entity.
And when we talk about, other things in the next few months, I mean, the B word obviously is Brexit. That's coming back into the news cycle now. I think is been noticeable how that's come back on the agenda. We've obviously got the furloughing scheme coming to an end as well. How are you dealing with these type of challenges as well? You've also mentioned about how there's a possibility of a second lockdown with a possible second wave. We don't know yet. How are you dealing with those kind of things? And have you noticed that there's been any kind of impact in terms of who you're dealing with client side as well?
Yeah, sadly, yes. So I color code everything. So we use traffic light systems all over the place internally for all of our management reporting. It's just super simplistic. And we've gone from, lots of green at the beginning of the year to a bit of red creeping in. That we then found ourselves in amber. We were then feeling a bit more comfortable. We're now beginning to get some of those red flashes that are coming back up again. And so we are trying to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from a structural perspective. I'm seeing that decision-making, despite the fact that we're now in September, decision-making seems to still be pushed out. There are a number of potential clients that are asking for proposals, and then decisions aren't being made. So that's unfortunate, but wholly understandable.
And is that, and you see that just as a as a result of the uncertainty that's coming ahead in the next few months, you're seeing that uncertainty starting again to have an impact on that decision-making process?
Yes. And also, to be honest with you, I think obviously the media itself, and although obviously public relations is not just about media relations, but the media itself has been under enormous pressure. Advertising revenue has gone down, and in line with that, so indeed has publishing houses' availability to keep all of the staff on board, and editorial has suffered within that. So actually getting a hold of the right journalists to communicate the stories to has been increasingly difficult.
That's really interesting, and it tees up to really nice way to talk about what they're happening in the industry right now and how the industry has changed and adapting. What are the key things that you see are going to have a real impact in the PR and comms industry as a result of what's gone on in the last 6 months? Are there things you're noticing where you're seeing it and you're thinking this is going to change the industry significantly, going forwards as a long-term thing?
I mean, I think we've been seeing the evolution in the industry for some time, especially with the rise of paid for and more through the lines campaigns that are put together, devised and designed and delivered by PR agencies. And we've seen an increase. We've just seen a kind of an exaggeration of that over this period. So, unfortunately, traditional media has been under massive economic pressures. And so, again, just being able to get to the right journalists to tell the stories is becoming increasingly difficult. Obviously, from our perspective, we're a kind of a reputation first agency. So we're seeing also, again, at the moment, there's been some slowing down in decision making amongst the investor community, which again has impacted some of these more innovative, exciting companies that are coming to market or that are evolving and growing to not quite deliver those expansion plans.
And when you're seeing that, do you think you're looking at that and are you thinking that that's going to be a long-term thing? There is that going to be that kind of contraction or restriction, at least, on that kind of investment as at least for 6 months, a year?
I don't know. I think different areas in the market are responding differently. Obviously, from a governmental perspective, they've put an awful lot of funds in place to support and prop up certain sectors. And I know that there's more work going on there. And so we'll see more sectors getting more relief and more support. That said, obviously, it's all funded by taxpayers. And the fewer amount of people that are in work, the less taxpayer money that's going into the coffers, and so that's a difficult one to manage. I'm hoping that especially those organisations that are more technologically led and more delivering of innovation, so wellness and healthcare, we're seeing taking off particularly well. We're seeing fintech move very, very quickly. We're seeing regtech, regulatory organisations, moving very quickly, and technology in the right environment is moving quickly as well. So there are certain pockets that are really doing well, and then obviously consumer, leisure, travel, tourism is under excruciating pressure.
Yeah, Kirsty, if people wanted to get in touch with you, both personally but also as part of the family of Milk and Honey, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably through our website, actually, which is milkandhoneypr.com.
Oh, I've got to ask before we go, and I'm going to treat myself to just and breaking the script here. What is the behind the name Milk and Honey?
Having grown up in agency and worked for some phenomenal agencies, I wanted to create a slightly different type of agency, one where people could come first, one where everybody shared in the success through ownership, one where we could have time to think, that you only worked on 5 clients. So this idea of this kind of golden land, this land of milk and honey. So hence the name.
It's an awesome name. Kirsty, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, on the final episode as well. And to all those listening and watching, thanks so much for being a part of this series. If you really like this episode and love what you've heard in the conversation we've had, there's 16 other episodes available on your preferred podcast library, or indeed on YouTube if you just search PR in Lockdown. Thanks very much for the PRCA for collaborating with Access Studios on this podcast series. And on behalf of me, Rob Double, and everyone who's been working on the series, thanks very much for joining PR in Lockdown. PR in Lockdown is presented by Rob Double, and the guest this episode was Kirsty Leighton, founder and managing partner of Milk and Honey PR. It is created by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA.